Hey guys, and welcome back to another Shadow Priest video. Today I'm going to be talking about the different covenants and which one you should choose if you want to be the strongest Shadow Priest you can be in 9.1. But before we get into it, if you like this video, make sure you click the like button, and if you really like it, feel free to subscribe. It'll keep you updated when I post new videos, and it helps me out a lot, so I would really appreciate it. Okay, so before we talk about what's the very best in 9.1, I want to talk about what was the best in 9.0 and why, specifically because in 9.1 things are a lot closer, which means the answer to this question is a lot harder. In 9.0, Night Fae for PvE was by far the best, right? And there are three reasons for that I'll get into. But in 9.1, there isn't really one covenant that's by far the best, and this is kind of a good thing, because if you're like having a lot of anxiety or whatever, and you don't want to make the wrong choice, right, then at least in 9.1, regardless of what you choose, it's all going to be pretty close to each other, right? So let's talk about why Night Fae was the strongest in 9.0. I'll give you the three reasons. So first, Night Fae just did the most damage. This seems pretty obvious as to why people would choose Night Fae if it does the most damage, but there's a bit of nuance. In 9.0, at 4-day Renown, which was the cap at the time, Night Fae's Soulbinds were just way stronger than any other Covenant's Soulbinds. Naya would give Grove Invigoration, which was really, really strong, and Karain would give First Strike, which was also really, really strong in Mythic Plus specifically, and Naya was the choice for Raid. So that's the first reason that people would choose Night Fae in 9.0. The second reason is for Fae Guardians. For Raid specifically, Fae Guardians lets you move your cooldowns. It gives you a little bit more flexibility in when you use your cooldowns, right? So if there's like a moment where you need your Void Form to be up really quickly, then Fae Guardians lets you make it in time, right? Or you still have the option of holding Void Form for a couple seconds, right? 10-15 seconds to mate a different damage profile. So Fae Guardians just gave you a lot of flexibility as far as when you use your cooldowns. And in Mythic Plus, you could use Fae Guardians on a Fire Mage, for instance, which meant that you got like Combust on every single pack, which was super, super strong. Basically, Fae Guardians was really, really nice to have as a Night Fae, right? And then the third thing that made Night Fae the best choice in 9.0 for PvE is Soul Shape. So Shadow Priest and priests in general have had mobility issues for pretty much as long as Priest has been in the game, right? We don't, as a Shadow Priest, we don't really have any options that help with mobility except for Body and Soul, and that's pretty much a talent that you can never change, or at least it feels really, really bad to not take that talent, because, like I said, we have pretty much no built-in mobility choices. That's why most high-end Shadow Priests will play Goblin for Rocket Jump, which just gives you one other choice as far as mobility goes. And that's why Soul Shape was so good for Shadow Priest, is because, like I said, we have pretty much no mobility, and Soul Shape gives you a blink and increased movement speed, and then 2 more blinks after, right? So it helps solve one of the big things that Shadow Priest has been lacking. So those are the three reasons why Night Fae was the easy choice as the best covenant in 9.0 for PvE for Shadow Priest. For PvP, the answer was really, really easy, and it is still this in 9.1. Venthyr is just by far the strongest choice. Mind Games, the covenant ability for Shadow Priest, is just so, so strong in PvP that there's pretty much, if you play PvP seriously, you pretty much will never ever choose a different covenant than Venthyr as a Shadow Priest, just because Mind Games is so strong. So, like I said, there were three reasons why Night Fae was the best for PvE for Shadow Priest in 9.0, but in 9.1, the first reason doesn't hold true anymore. So, Night Fae doesn't do the most damage in 9.1 as far as the covenants go. That now goes to Necrolord. So Necrolord Shadow Priests get a new legendary, a Covenant legendary called Pallid Command. And for a long time, I've talked about this before, But for a long time, Pallid Command was really, really bugged. So it wasn't really easy to tell if it was better or just as good as Shadowflame Prism, or if it was maybe a little bit worse. But right before they dropped 9.1, they fixed a lot of the bugs with Pallid Command, and it turns out that it is actually stronger than Shadowflame Prism if you're a Necrolord, right? So the difference between Night Fae with Shadowflame Prism and Necrolord with Pallid Command, if you're playing all the right Soulbinds and Conduits and things, and I'll make a video in the future about those. But if you're playing all the right stuff, then Necrolords with Pallid Command do about 300 damage on average, more than a Night Fae Shadow Priest playing Shadowflame Prism. So when you hear this, it's really easy to think, oh, Necrolord does the most damage, I'm going to play Necrolord, right? And that's true, it does do the most damage, and if that's the only thing you're looking for, then Necrolord is the best choice. That's right. But the other two things that made Night Fae really strong are still true in 9.1. You still get Fae Guardians, and you still get Soul Shape, right? As opposed to Unholy Nova and Fleshcraft from Necrolord. Which, in my opinion, this is a little bit of personal preference, but in my opinion, Fleshcraft is worse than Soul Shape. It doesn't solve as many of the issues that Shadow Priest has. And Unholy Nova is really a little bit lackluster, especially in single target, right? And Unholy Nova, as far as I know, still has quadratic scaling that snapshots. This is a bit of a technical thing, but if you hit 6 things with Unholy Nova, and it's doing, 1,000 damage to each of them, and then one of the 6 things dies, then instead of scaling up the damage on the remaining 5 things, it still just does 1,000 damage to those 5. This was a bug that happened to Unholy Nova before 9.0 even dropped. It was known in the beta, but as far as I know, that's still the case, and I don't really like that. That's a little bit off-putting. But the big thing is that Fae Guardians, like I said, gives you so much flexibility with your cooldowns, right? So, in the new raid, if there's ever a time where you need a Void Form, and then you need another Void Form within the next minute and 15 seconds, and it's very important that you have it at that time, then Necrolord will just not be able to make that check, right? Whereas Night Fae Shadow Priest will. And, like I said, the difference between them is only about 300 DPS, which is enough to consider changing, right? But it's not enough for me to just say, Necrolord is the best, you should all play Necrolord. In fact, I'm going to stay Night Fae, at least for the next 5 or 6 weeks, right? So, one other thing that I want to say before we start to wrap this video up is that Necrolord, especially at the lower levels of renown, so right now, as I'm making this video, the maximum renown you can have is 42, and then next week it'll be 45, and when Mythic drops it'll be 48, right? At these low levels of renown, the difference between Night Fae and Necrolord is pretty much 0, right? In fact, Night Fae is still stronger as far as damage goes, up until 48 renown, because that's when you can get Pallid Command as a Necrolord, that's when you get the Covenant Legendary. And only then does Necrolord really start to become stronger. And even then, at 48 renown, the first week of Mythic, Necrolord is not significantly stronger. You have to wait until renown 55, a couple weeks later, when you can get the Kevin's Ooze Soulbind trait. That's when Necrolord really makes that 300 DPS gap. So up until you hit renown 55, Night Fae and Necrolord are going to be really, really, really close, like within 100 DPS of each other, with Night Fae starting out stronger at low renown levels, and then Necrolord slowly getting better as you get more renown. So, when you're trying to make this decision of which Covenant you should play as a Shadow Priest in PvE, you need to take into consideration several of these things, right? How important is it to you that you have really good mobility? Do you really care about having Soul Shape so that you can make it to certain places in time, or that you can blink through certain abilities in the new raid, that kind of thing? Or would you rather have Fleshcraft, which gives you this really big shield so that you can tank certain mechanics, right? Instead of having to, die or pop Dispersion, you can pop Fleshcraft, and then you can save Dispersion for something else in the future, right? So that's one thing to look at. Another thing to look at is how quickly do you plan on clearing the raid? If you're going to be a world first raider, right? If anyone from Limit is watching this, then they would probably play Night Fae because they're going to kill it within, 2 weeks of Mythic dropping. And within those first 2 weeks, the max renown you're going to get is 54, which means that the difference between Necrolord and Night Fae is super, super small. And Night Fae is probably just the better choice. But if you don't plan on killing Sylvanas until 4 or 5 months from now, 6 months from now, right? You're just a regular Mythic Raider in a top 200 US guild or something, and it's going to take several months for you to kill it, then maybe Necrolord is the right choice, because, like I said, as we get higher and higher renown, the gap between Night Fae and Necrolord as far as damage goes is going to get bigger and bigger, and Necrolord is going to be stronger and stronger, right? So maybe for these first couple weeks, if you don't plan on killing Sylvanas really quickly, you stay Night Fae, maybe the first week of Mythic, second week of Mythic, and then on the third week of Mythic, you swap to Necrolord and you do the Renown grind and everything, and you start playing Pallid Command. That's an option. But for me, for the foreseeable future, I'm going to stay Night Fae. I'm really invested in Fae Guardians and Soul Shape. I think they're super, super strong. I think it's not worth giving those up for Fleshcraft and Unholy Nova, even though it's a little bit more damage. I think playing Shadowflame Prism with Mindbender gives you a lot more options in other PvE content, right? So Mythic Plus, Night Fae is going to be stronger than Necrolord, almost certainly, because you have more Void Forms over the course of the dungeon. You can line up Mindbender with more of your Void Forms because you're playing Shadowflame Prism as a Night Fae. You'll be playing Pallid Command almost certainly as a Necrolord, and that is not super great in Mythic Plus. But we'll just have to see how the meta changes over time. But yeah, like I said, I'm going to stay Night Fae for the foreseeable future. If you choose to play Necrolord, not the worst choice out there, and it will be a better choice as we move further into the tier, like I said. If you choose to stay Night Fae, probably the safer choice, especially here at the beginning of the tier. And then, I'll just mention Kyrian briefly, because it's kind of a meme for Shadow Priest. Kyrian actually doesn't do horrible damage. The big problem with Kyrian is that it throws off the rotation. It makes it really, really clunky and hard to play. So if you are playing a Kyrian Shadow Priest, or you are thinking about playing a Kyrian Shadow Priest, take into account that it's gonna feel a lot different than Night Fae Shadow Priest or Necrolord Shadow Priest or even Venthyr Shadow Priest. The Covenant ability for Kyrian makes your rotation just super, super different, and so if you haven't done it before, it's going to be pretty hard to pick up, but you'll be able to pick it up hopefully. But the damage is worse than Night Fae and Necrolord, and the rotation is super weird, so I would not suggest going Kyrian. And if you're Kyrian, I would suggest swapping off of it to something else. But it's your life, your character. If you want to play Kyrian, you can play Kyrian. So, to wrap up this video, if you're going to play PvP, the answer is very, very clear. Play Venthyr. If PvP is your only thing, then play Venthyr. If you're going to play PvE, then you need to take into account a couple things. You need to think about your mobility, you need to think about Fleshcraft, you need to weigh those things in your mind and figure out which one you want more. I would suggest, at least for the beginning, you stay Night Fae or you switch to Night Fae. It's going to be the best for, maybe a month and a half or something, and then Necrolord is going to start to pull ahead. But even then, I probably wouldn't swap to Necrolord until late into the tier. I'm still going to be Night Fae as far as I can see. Never going to swap to Necrolord until maybe into farm. Okay, so hopefully this video was helpful. I know I rambled a bit and I said several things. I repeated myself several times. But hopefully you got something useful out of this. Let me know what you guys plan on playing in the comments below. and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.